Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. That's a very corny proverb, but it's easy to take out opposition's cases with that one simple line. Here's what I've noticed about the case of opposition so far. The rhetoric of trap only works because they try to paint welfare as a protection that should be sustained for a lifetime, and work is a punishment for these individuals. And it's basically, oh no, you will have a job, therefore your life becomes so dreadful. It's kind of insulting, right? Because we say that these people already want to have a job in the first place. They want to have the upward mobility in order for them to alleviate themselves out of poverty. And we say that they can only call this a trap by pretending that remaining outside the labor market is far more secure future for them. Even though you do not know how affluent or liberal your future state leaders will be, especially since elections happen in a cycle. It only takes one bad president to wreck the economy and destroy the fragile security that they are relying on to take out the cases from opposition. And we say that that is the real trap. That is the dependency trap of the impoverished. One clarification. This debate is not about, you are working and you will receive stipend, and if you work at the same time, you get lesser stipend upon the transition. Opposition is confused in the model. These people do not need to be working in order for them to receive the stipend. It happens in cycle because the point of scheme is to precisely support them during the transition to employment. That's why they still receive this stipend in the first place. The benefit is not for having a job because, again, they help you to retain or get more job while, in the first time, they're giving you some stipends or some subsidies in the first place. So, in your side, they will remain unemployable, and that becomes a foundational problem that we are trying to solve. Because at the same time, one, they're unemployable right now. That's why it's harder for them to transition and alleviate themselves out of poverty. And at the same time, we give them incentives to remain unemployed, just like what Joseph stated. Next time, please take a few moments to read and comprehend the entire motion. Because the call out of, oh no, you will have mental health problems, then fuck that. You have different standard applied for these individuals. If you are PWD, then therefore you get better support from the state to transition into workforce rather than dying unemployed and asking yourself if you are a burden to the state and to your family. Panel, welfare are aimed to have a beneficial upward for our society. The state is not your sugar daddy because we already have other stakeholders that we should also take care of. So before that, first question then. What kind of welfare state best protects poor people over time? Because welfares do exist in both sides, but we have limited fiscal capability as a state, so we should choose which alleviates the conditions at large. First part, on autonomy and longevity of the people involved. I want to note that what's the problem absent arise? Oftentimes, people are locked in within this program in side propositions, like what you can see in 4Ps, for example, and here's the negative launch here. Dependency arises not from any inherent aversion to labor, but from the incentive structure created by the program itself. Because when the comfort that you feel every single day is validated without a pathway towards the upward mobility of your condition, then you will choke in that blanket that you rely on. And here's the mech, right? The continued receipt of the state assistance is effectively conditioned on remaining within the defined level of economic deprivation, as in, like, cash transfer regimes like 4Ps. Those beneficiaries are induced to prioritize preservation of eligibility over uncertain attempts at the upward mobility. So, this happens because any marginal increases of income, entry into irregular employment, or acceptance of unstable work will result in a diminution or loss of benefit without any corresponding assurance in the long-term security. So the loss of quote-unquote or the lessened version of the quote, I said chat, lessened version of the quote-unquote stipend happens in both sides, but it happens worse in their side. But sure, launch your POI.
Right. Please address how does your model prevent employers from exploiting workers who cannot refuse jobs without losing benefits engaged?
What do you mean? How are they going to prevent exploitation? It won't happen because you are literally transitioned by the state. You have state security. You have all of those civil workers who will check from time to time what is happening within your condition. That's why we have reporting data that actually allocates some resources in order for them to track whether you are really alleviated out of that condition, or maybe they will still have more time to help you in those transitions in the first place. And since oftentimes they don't want to work in the first place, guys, what happens when you are locked in these internalities that Joseph has mentioned? You get situations like in Australia where these marginalized individuals use the subsidies to take drugs. get addicted to smoking, and dives themselves in recreational purposes. This is also prevalent in the Philippines, by the way. So one, you lock these people in the worst conditions psychologically without the conditional agreement that they need to work up once they attain enough sufficiency. And second, you make the state less productive because middle class citizens are forced to work harder and pay more taxes to sustain these programs, only to eventually realize that the system is not being used as a bridge out of poverty, but as a mechanism that entrenches long-term dependency. So, second question then. How does this affect the political lobbying that happens within the state? And this also clashes with the quote-unquote self-reinforcing cycle that opposition tries to offer. Guys, look at what's happening right now in the status quo. This makes vote buying easier because pretentious politicians from the right no longer need to offer large amounts of money or any economic incentive for them to get voted. They only need to imply that the continued access to aid, priority listing, or future assistance will happen once you vote them, once you depend on their political loyalty. And this is super prevalent in local government. And here's what happened here. A poor household that relies on monthly welfare to buy food and keep children in school is far more likely to vote defensively for this incumbent or candidate backed by local political brokers. That is why bad politics happens more in their side, because you are not incentivized to vote for the most liberalized option that literally provides more job, creates more transitional program for these poor people, because literally you are choked in that comfort in the first place. That's why the democratic backsliding happens further in their side, because voting behavior becomes driven less by which policy best expands the economy and by and it's driven more by which candidate seems to less likely to disrupt the aid that they currently rely on. And by the way, the poor, especially in the developing country, often decides the outcome of your elections due to their numbers. So this creates resentment from the middle class and any other class because they feel that they are the ones carrying the tax burden while others remain dependent on the very system that their taxes contain. So that resentment worsens when welfare-dependent voters are seen as helping bad politicians in power simply because those politicians promise to deserve or preserve the aid. As a result, instead of solidarity across classes, you get bad politics. It's a mismatch towards state improvement, not just for this individual, but also at large.